Hi, my name's Cole, and I'm the head technician here at eevees. And today I'm going to be teaching you how to upgrade the original driver board in the V12 to the V2 driver board, which has 150 volt rated MOSFETs. So you're going to need some tools to do this. You're going to need a 2mm hex key, a 3mm hex key, 4mm hex key, a number 2 Phillips screwdriver, and a flathead screwdriver, as well as like a thin screwdriver that's a flathead, or a pry tool here, preferably a plastic pry tool. And if you want to keep yourself organized while you're taking it apart, you can have a parts case where you can store all the individual screws. The V12 has a lot of screws, so I highly recommend that you use a parts case while you do this. You also want to give yourself a nice clean surface to work on because the case of the V12 will scratch very easily. So let's get started. So we'll grab our 4mm hex key and we're going to undo the pedal bolts. We're just going to plop those screws into our parts tray, and we're going to grab a flathead screwdriver and undo the plastic clips on the pads. You want to go carefully and slowly so as you don't break any of the tabs off, or the pads will not sit properly on the V12 afterwards. Slow and careful is the name of the game here. You can see that all the tabs are still intact, and that is the desired outcome. Next, we're going to be removing the outer plastic shell. In order to remove the shell, you need to undo these screws shown here. Removing the pedal here, if you go to turn any of these bolts and you feel like one of them doesn't want to turn, then what you're going to want to do is stop. Don't use this method of removing the pedal with these 4 bolts. What you're going to want to do is go to this worm screw on this side, back off this worm screw like that, keep backing it off till it's about there. And then what you're going to do is take one of your keys here, take a hammer and hammer out this pin. If these screws want to come out with ease, you definitely want to do it with these 4 screws. It's a much easier way to do it.
Oh, that's good to know.
So what you'll do is you'll take one like that, you'll do a crack like that. If they all crack, you're good to undo them all. If any of them slip, don't continue. If you strip one of those, you're gonna have a really bad time. So one thing you want to be careful with here is there's these little tabs, and you want to make sure that you lift the plastic so it's off of the tab when you pull it off. So we'll do the back here first. You remove those tabs there. You can go under here. There's a tab below there as well. You can snap it out. Do the same on the other side. It's identical. And then you can slide your panel off here. Now this side, You want to be really careful when you're sliding this off. There's a power button here, and this button is not attached to the actual electrical button mechanism. It's just a rubber piece, and you have the potential when you pull this off to actually turn the wheel on. And EUCs, when you have them in the air, they're gonna take off on you. So I would recommend taking this panel off while it's on the ground.
Continue.
So be wary of that power button there. We've got a tab right here. We're gonna undo that tab, undo that tab there, a tab down here, undo that tab, undo that tab. And then when you pull this off, especially if you're doing it on a bench, you want to be ultra careful that that power button is not going to rub on the button itself. Here, if you look from the top, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to remove those 4. If you're lucky enough to have impact, you can impact. And then to remove this whole top piece, we also have to remove these 2 screws, which was already removed on both sides. So you do the 2 tabs here, there's 2 tabs on this side. Undo them, now you can pull straight up. We got the main board underneath this black cover, and then the driver board. The driver board is what we want to replace. Before we unplug anything, we're going to unplug these power connectors. XT90. Now we're going to disconnect the charge port connectors for the 2 batteries. You can just pull up on them and the tabs will unclip. And now we'll remove the 3-pin charge port connector using the same technique. We're just going to pull up and do a little bit of a wiggle on it, and then it pops out. We'll remove the rubber shroud and we'll put that in our box for later. So these are your speaker wires. You really want to be careful with these. This is what this little plastic spudge tool comes in handy for, because when you pull these out, sometimes the connector on the male connector on the board wants to come off with them. So if you put your little spudge tool in there and hold the connector down while you pull out, the male connector will stay in place and the female connector will come out. If you just yank on it, it's gonna pull the connector out. And you don't wanna have that happen. If you do, you can still put it back in, but you have to make sure you remember the polarity. So if your connector pulls out, you want to check the polarity of this connector, and here you want to make sure that you're putting this connector in the same direction. And we're just going to be gentle with it, like this. We're going to go till we see the holes are matched up. Like so, and then we can push the connector down, and now the connector is reseated. There, we pulled that connector out. So the speakers are all disconnected, these little strangly wires here. Next, we've got our lights. I'm gonna get a Sharpie. What I recommend is use a Sharpie to mark each one of these. So we got the 2 connectors here, so I'm gonna go 1, 1. Then on this connector, I'm gonna go 2, 2. The connectors are marked in Chinese on the board what they're for, but if you don't speak Chinese, this will help you make sense of it very quickly when you're putting it all back together. Then I'm just gonna do Roman numeral 4 on that. So now those light connectors are all sorted out. So let's get our number 2 Phillips, and we're going to remove the 4 Phillips screws holding the light board on. Now we're just using the same plastic pry tool to pry out those light board connectors. We're going to that aside. Okay, so now we have the charging port connector we want to remove here. We have the battery BMS connector here. Want to remove. Here's the right side BMS connector we want to remove. And then we have our phase wires and our hall sensor. So we're gonna pull the phase wires out first. You can remember the color here. We got yellow, green, blue. This is the front of the EUC with the headlight. It's also marked in Chinese. And then we can pull this back and be very gentle with our hall connector there. So you can see, when you pull it out, you want to make sure all these wires are still intact. The halls are very critical for the performance of this EUC to even work. So now we can start pulling our wires out of the way because we're going to want to pull this whole heatsink, control board, and main board assembly up out of the EUC. We got our headlight here. Let's remove our headlight. This connector can kind of be stubborn, so good, we got that out. You want to remove all of that. And now we're gonna have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, as well as 1, 2, 3, 4. We're gonna have to remove all of those. Then this side, 4. Do these ones. So we're just gonna feel around until we're slotted in. There we go. Two of these two screws here, and we're going to screw them back into the top here. This is just going to give us something to grab onto when we take the whole assembly out. We're just going to confirm we got 4 screws out on this side, 4 screws out on this side, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we know we can pull the whole assembly out. So we're just gonna grab it by our screws here, and boom, now it's out. So now we'll put this on a bench so we can work on it. With our assembly here, we can leave these screws on, they're fine. They're just self-tapping screws in the metal. We take our tiniest one here for the hex key, we put it in there. We can loosen that guy up. We can loosen this guy up. We got 2 on the other side. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the next step, we're gonna pull the plastic cover up. Remember at the top of the plastic cover, we got the main board, and the main board is connected with a cable down to the driver board. So we're gonna be careful not to pull that out too hard. It comes out a certain direction. We can check inside here, see where our cable is. So our cable is right here. So we're gonna wanna come up this way like that, and then we can pull our cable out, and now we can set this aside. Up here you can see the main board. We're not gonna be touching the main board. The main board is responsible for your serial number, so we don't need this. So here is the heatsink assembly with the original driver board. The original driver boards, they're blue. For the most part, it doesn't look like there are any differences between the new main driver boards and the old ones, except for the new ones have a black color, whereas this is blue. And also you can see these are the 100 volt rated MOSFETs, and the black board will have 150 volt rated MOSFETs. So to remove this board, you're gonna use your Phillips #2 screwdriver. You're gonna start right here. Generally speaking, before you touch any electronics like this, it's good to ground yourself on a piece of metal. Because the static electricity in your hands, if you touch any of the chips on this board, can destroy the chips. It's rare, but it does happen. So make sure you ground yourself on something metal. Here we're doing it on the stand. So we'll start right here. You're gonna be really gentle with this. You wanna pull these out of the way. This capacitor, you can break it off the board if you're not careful. Now we're gonna move on to the 12 MOSFETs here. You won't be able to remove these unless you pull the rubber piece out of the way. And so each one of these MOSFETs, you wanna be careful that you make sure you save this plastic ring. This plastic ring is an electrical insulator, and it stops the MOSFET from shorting out. Okay, so now that we have all 12 screws out, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we can safely pull the board up. Now you wanna be careful, you kinda wanna just jiggle it at first. It's gonna be stuck on with all the heatsink paste right here and the thermal pads underneath. So don't be afraid if it doesn't wanna come off immediately, but now it's come off. And you can see we have thermal pads here. We're gonna need to transfer these thermal pads to the new driver board. So this are the new driver boards here. Sometimes even in shipping, the MOSFETs can come a little bent. You can just unbend them like that, no worries, don't use too much force. And you can see it's in a black color, and we also have the Huntech 150 volt MOSFETs here. The driver board also comes with some extra MOSFET screws with the plastic pieces. Those are really important. And it also comes with a new strip with, this is an insulation strip to insulate the MOSFETs. Old driver board here, and lining everything up. So we're gonna do that right about there, and this one right about there. Might be better to put it a little bit over that way. Now this blue one is the most delicate. This goes over these two power transistors here, and this is very hard to remove without tearing it. I'm gonna try to use my spudger tool here. If you do tear it a little bit like that, it's not the end of the world. So we removed it there. I'm just gonna place that down on top of those two power MOSFETs there. If there's no tears in this installation strip, it's okay to reuse this installation strip. It's gonna be a lot less work than trying to replace it. So we've got our new driver board here. We're just gonna straighten out the MOSFETs a little bit, and then we can check placement. So there's our MOSFET holes here. We're gonna take it down like this, and we're gonna check to see if everything is lining up as it should. I'm gonna check on this side. Where you really wanna check is these posts here to make sure that the screw holes match up and that these MOSFET holes match up too. So I'm gonna start screwing it in. You're gonna wanna go from the center screw first, this one here. To make sure that this is straight here, it isn't being bent. The board itself, it looks straight on this side too. So that's good, it's nice and flush. Just gonna tighten up our center screw again. These screws are important to make sure they're tight because the gyroscope is on the driver board and you don't want the driver board flopping around. Otherwise it's gonna cause irregular shaking. You're careful with these screws, you don't wanna over tighten them. If you over tighten them, you could break this plastic insulation ring. Which is vital to the operation of the EUC. We're gonna remove these guys just because they're gonna get in the way. And we're gonna place our top cover down. And you should see it pop on. You got the screw holes aligned there. You got the screw holes aligned there. We're gonna do our 4 corner screws. All right, so now we're gonna take our driver board main board assembly and we're gonna install it back into the V12. So look for the battery connectors and the charge port on your EUC. That's what you wanna line up. You can see the charge port wires there. And so we just snugly fit it back in. It should sit down so it sits flush to the top of the heatsink. And now we're just gonna screw it in. So these 4 are done. Now what also is holding in the heatsink are 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Last thing you're gonna wanna do is plug in the power. You want everything connected first before you connect the power connections. So the first thing we're gonna do here are our phase wires. Now, wires were fed through this piece here. We're gonna got yellow as our first one here. Push that through. We've got green in the middle. And then we've got blue. And then we also have our Hall connection, which is right here. We're gonna carefully feed that through. You gotta be really delicate with your Hall wires. If you'd like, you can reapply a bead of silicone to your phase wires. Now that our wheel is done, we're going to put it down on the ground and plug it into a charger. This is a brand new V12, so when we replace the board on it, it still wants us to activate the vehicle. This won't happen for you if you're replacing a blown MOSFET board or you've already activated your wheel. And there we go, we've got a balancing V12 that's good to go. I recommend that you check the headlight, low beam and high beam, as well as checking the speakers to make sure that everything was reconnected properly. Hope you enjoyed this video, and happy riding.